Hi, I'm Martin Gillespie, the host of Metabolic Wellbeing Without the BS. On this podcast today, I have one of, in my opinion, the leading advocates on the way forward on the subject of cancer. Professor Thomas Seyfried, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thanks, Martin. It's very nice to be here today.
Thomas, before we go into some of your work and your beliefs and where you take this subject matter, let me ask you a very important question. How the hell are you today, metabolically and healthy, enjoying this day on Earth?
Well, I don't know. I'm breathing air. I don't have any pain. I'm able to walk around a reservoir. I'm able to interact with my students. I'm able to look at experimental strategies. So the answer is I don't know. My blood work looks pretty good. I don't see any signs from the last readouts. And the bottom line is, how do you feel?
Yeah.
Not a complicated question. Want to know about somebody. How are you feeling? Oh, I feel good. Okay, well, that says it all right there. If you say, oh no, I feel like shit, man, I got a bad knee, I got constipation, oh, I got heart murmurs, and no, I don't have any of that. So, but bottom line is how you feel. Yeah, I feel pretty good.
Well, for a young man, you're looking pretty good actually, and it must be that beautiful Boston air that keeps you young and vibrant.
Well, you got to be tough to live in this place. You got to deal with a lot of winds, hurricanes, freezing cold, and crazy drivers. So
I've been there a couple of times, as I alluded to you, and it is one hell of a place. In fact, it's probably the only place in the US that, if the opportunity, I would jump at to go and live there. Must be kind of mad.
Yeah, but, well, it is actually kind of a nice place because the Pilgrims first came here from England, and it was harsh. But relative to California with the earthquakes and the fires, and the guys living in the Midwest with the tornadoes, and the guys in the South, it's actually not bad. So when it's all relative, everything is relative. So you gotta look at it that way.
Thomas, over the last 25 years in particular, you have focused an incredible amount of time, resources, and research into the area of metabolic cancer. Can you elaborate a little bit more, in a nutshell, what exactly that you have been doing and why we have to look at cancer in a different lens?
Yeah, well, we've been studying metabolism of epilepsy for years too, I first started mapping genes for epilepsy. Then we realized the ketogenic diet didn't make any difference what kind of mutation the people with epilepsy or models with epilepsy had. It seemed like this diet could block that. It all came down to glucose levels of glucose and elevation of ketones. And then when we were looking at our brain cancer biochemistry for glycolipid biochemistry and brain cancer, we started to look at the power of calorie restriction and water-only fasting that we did with the epilepsy mice, and we started doing it with the brain tumor mice. And then we got linked into what Otto Warburg had said a long time ago, that these cancer cells are driven by a fermentation metabolism, because their ability to generate energy through oxidative phosphorylation using oxygen breathing essentially was defective or inefficient in some way. And I said, well, how come people don't talk about Warburg? How come people don't look at, because in my work with the brain cancer, I was seeing things that absolutely supported what he said. And then Linda Nebling from Case Western Reserve treated two little kids with brain tumors, inoperable, incurable brain cancer, with the ketogenic diet, based on what Warburg said about tumor cells are dependent on glucose, and they are almost exclusively dependent on sugar. So I started to say, is that true? Who the hell is this guy Warburg? And I started doing a real in-depth analysis of all of his papers translated back into English, and looking at all the papers from his work in the 1920s all the way up to the 1950s and 60s. And we were seeing things that absolutely supported what Otto Warburg was saying all along. And then I try to figure out why the cancer field is not recognizing what Warburg had done. And then it became clear as I started publishing more papers and a few other guys started publishing more papers. They were talking about the Warburg effect, which is essentially the cancer cells fermenting. And I said, of course, ferment is energy without oxygen, lactic acid fermentation using glucose. It's called in the traditional biochemistry, it's called lactic acid fermentation, meaning glucose is fermented to produce lactic acid as a waste product. Well, Warburg was seeing this in the cancer patients and animals and rats, mice, humans. And he said, it's all because the oxphos is defective. And I said, yeah, it makes perfect sense. And then I looked at the field, the entire cancer field, and they said, oh, no, that's not the reason. We're not really sure why a tumor cell would choose to ferment. I said, what the hell do you mean a tumor cell has no choice? What the hell are you talking about? This teleological bullshit. So a cancer cell has no choice. It's fermenting because it can't respire. If it doesn't respire, if it doesn't ferment, it's going to be dead. And that's exactly what Warburg said. A gradual transition from respiration to fermentation leads to dysregulated cell growth. And I said, I see that. Well, why did the whole cancer field not see that? Rather than trying to, the gene mutations are making the cell want to ferment. What the hell is that? That's not kind of rational scientific thinking. So then I started to look deeply into the mitochondria structure and function of all these tumor cells. And it took me a while to go back through the literature and look at the electron microscopy work from the 1960s and 70s, when guys were just looking at stuff under the microscope to see what it looked like. And invariably, when you look at the mitochondria of all kinds of cancers, whether it's Hodgkin's lymphoma, brain cancer, colon cancer, breast cancer, the mitochondria look abnormal in structure. And then when you look at functional assays for mitochondria, they don't function right. And sometimes there's fewer number, abnormal structure and function. And I said, well, of course, if you have that, the cell has to ferment. It has no choice. Otherwise, it's going to be dead. There's no choices here. It's a necessity. It's a necessity to ferment when oxphos is interrupted. And Warburg was very clear. He said, if you interrupt oxphos too acutely, the cell will die and you'll never get a tumor cell from a dead cell. And the proof of that is he used these drugs that would interfere with oxidative phosphorylation and see the cells die. But what his contribution is that the damage or the insult to oxidative phosphorylation was a chronic event. It took a while for the cell to readjust itself while the cell over years was slowly suffocating. But in time, it was gradually upregulating fermentation pathways, these ancient fermentation pathways. So as I said, here, if a person were to drink cyanide, and this is like the Jonestown massacre, right? Everybody drank the Kool-Aid with the cyanide. They're all dead. In 2 minutes, they're dead. Cancer cells don't die in cyanide. Okay, you can pour cyanide. We do it all the time. Grow cancer cells in cyanide or the absence of. What the hell? How these cells aren't using oxidative phosphorus? How are they staying alive in the presence of cyanide, which would kill anybody doing respiration? And the answer is they're fermenting. So that tells us right off that why are they fermenting? Because their oxphos is defective. How do you know that? Look under the microscope. Well, I don't believe that. So what they were doing is they were putting cancer cells in a culture dish and measuring the consumption of oxygen by the cancer cell. And many cancer cells take in oxygen in a similar way to a normal cell. And therefore, that must be, see, they're using. So they made the inappropriate connection that oxygen consumption in a cancer cell was linked to oxidative phosphorylation. Warburg made the same mistake, actually. They were using oxygen consumption as a surrogate marker for ATP synthesis through oxidative phosphorylation. Okay, Warburg himself did that. Warburg's work was done on sea urchins, and he built his whole thing on normal tissues in sea urchins who had active oxygen consumption with a linked ATP synthesis. And when he went to tumor cells, he saw oxygen consumption was much less, and the energy was coming from a fermentation. But what we have found is the oxygen consumed by a cancer cell is not used for ATP synthesis. And it's very different from normal cells. So the cancer cell produces reactive oxygen species, which are carcinogenic and mutagenic. So cancer cells take in oxygen, similar to normal cells sometimes. But the oxygen consumption of a cancer cell is not used for ATP synthesis through oxidative phosphorylation. This is the confusion part of the still remains. The field does not accept the fact that oxygen consumption is not linked to ATP synthesis in a cancer cell. So this is what persists. So they hold on to the gene theory. So the gene mutations that you see in cancer cells are thought to be responsible for the dysregulated cell growth. According to the mitochondrial metabolic theory, the gene mutations are there, but they're effects of the damage and the inefficiency of the oxidative phosphorylation. They're not the cause, they're a downstream effect. So we both look at the evidence, and we have different interpretations for the same evidence. Those guys refuse to believe that OXPHOS is abnormal. They believe that the mutations are the cause of the dysregulated cell growth. It's very, very clear. We have never found a tumor cell that has a normal content or composition of mitochondria. That's clear. And they're always we have never found a tumor cell that can survive or grow, let's put it that way, in the absence of glucose and glutamine, the two fermentable fuels. So once you know that, and once you have a defective mitochondria, you can't burn fatty acids or ketone bodies. And I have a new paper coming out showing that all major cancers store fatty acids in the form of lipid droplets in the cytoplasm because they can't use them for energy. They store them as a protection, because if the cell starts burning fatty acids, reactive oxygen species go up and it kills the cell by a ROS-induced mechanism of death. So once you understand, I don't know, maybe when I'm talking a little bit over the heads of some people, but the bottom line here is that you have to look at what the evidence shows. No cancer cell has been found that has a normal content or composition of mitochondria, number one. All major cancers store lipid drops in the cytoplasm. Number two, because OXPHOS is defective. We have not found any tumor cell that can survive in the absence of glucose and glutamine when you grow them in a culture dish, okay? So, and yes, they do take in oxygen consumption, but it's not linked to ATP synthesis through oxidative phosphorylation. Our big breakthrough in the cancer field is that we have found a very significant third form of energy for the cancer cell, and it's called mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation. In other words, ATP is coming out of the mitochondria, but it's ATP generated from amino acid fermentation, not from oxidative phosphorylation. So Warburg knew nothing about this. Almost nobody in the cancer field today understands this or knows about it, because we don't see it. They kind of not even talk about it. So cancer cells are generating energy by amino acid fermentation, predominantly glutamine, with ATP coming out of the mitochondria, but not from oxidative phosphorylation. So and that form of energy can also happen in the presence of cyanide. So we're learning more and more about the mechanism by which cancer cells can generate energy and stay alive. And not only that, we realized from work of others that the mitochondria controls the life of the cell cycle. As long as the cell is in a differentiated quiescent state because of the mitochondrial function, when that begins to loosen up, the cell falls back on its default state of proliferation. So the very organelle needed to maintain the differentiated state, the state of normalcy, is the mitochondrion. When that organelle starts to falter in any different kinds of ways, the cell will either die or gradually upregulate fermentation, therefore unleashing the control of the cell from the mitochondria to ancient fermentation pathways, leading to dysregulated cell growth and what we refer today as cancer. So, and all of the cancer is telling us exactly what it's doing. All you have to look at in the microenvironment is full of lactic acid and succinic acid. Those are the exhaust waste products of the fermentation energy metabolism. Every cancer cell is dumping out lactic acid and succinic acid. Those are the waste products telling us what they're using to grow. Their cancer cells have been telling us that. And yet the guys who think cancer is a genetic disease are saying, oh no, those are the result of abnormalities in gene expression. No, they're not. They're waste products of fermentation. Why are they fermenting? Because OXPHOS is defective. Oh, you mean the oxygen consumption of the cancer cell is not linked to AT? No, it's not. It's not linked to AT. It's linked to ROS production.
One of the key things here, right? And you've given an amazing summary there, but what I find bizarre is that people have this total disbelief. Oh, this person at the age of 45 has now got cancer. Cancer just doesn't appear in a human body. It's there for decades.
It can be there for decades. There are some cancers that come on a little bit faster, but never, you don't go to bed at night and wake up with a big tumor on your ass the next morning, right? I mean, it takes time for wherever that cell. And the problem is that this happens gradually over time. And in my book and papers, I've shown clearly the linkage between how many different things in the environment that we live in can cause chronic damage to the mitochondrial oxidative phosphorylation, leading to a gradual compensatory fermentation and dysregulated cell growth. So, some people, and what we're finding is that lack of exercise. This is consumption of processed foods, highly processed carbohydrates, processed foods, stress of living. So people are now, in front of computers and caught in traffic, and they're eating poorly processed foods. They're not exercising the way they should. That might lead to a breast cancer in this woman. It might lead to colon cancer in somebody else. It could lead to bladder cancer in this person. We don't know. All we know is that chronic disruption of oxidative phosphorylation in a particular group of cells in a particular organ can lead to dysregulated cell growth, which is cancer. And we're seeing it earlier. I'm shocked at how many younger people are contacting me. People in their late 20s and mid 30s are now calling me up and say, I got triple negative breast cancer, or they got stage 4 colon cancer or some damn thing. And I'm saying this is generally not seen in people this young. So you would expect it maybe in some guy in his 50s or 60s or 70s. But to see this happening at a younger and younger age, where it hasn't happened before, clearly something in our environment is triggering an onset of cancer, a great incidence and people being diagnosed with cancer. And we have a book from Ted Noakes in Wales, right? That's the Welsh people in Wales.
Yep.
Right? Okay, the coal miners and all those guys. They in 1880s, they looked at all the things that were killing the coal miners and the people in Wales. And it was like infections and injuries, and cancer was like really minimal. But in 1996, cancer was killing a 30% increase over the 1800s, 40% increase. So clearly, it's the environment that's something changes in our environment. Diet and lifestyle issues are leading to damage to oxidative phosphorylation in some group of cells, leading to dysregulated cell growth.
Yeah, but Thomas, you have to look at the bizarre way that people are their first impression of cancer. And if you take the famous President Nixon quote, "The war on cancer in 1971, billions and billions of dollars have been spent on this cancer treatment," if that makes sense, without looking at the root cause.
Yeah, well, I think it was determined pretty much in the early 1960s that most people were believing that cancer was some sort of a genetic disease. As I said, the work of Watson and Crick and Jacob Monod from France were pretty much identifying genes as a critical controller of biochemistry. So the Warburg concepts and the people that were working on the biochemistry and energy metabolism pretty much were bypassed. They were pretty much ignored. And the field ran off chasing genes, and they still are. And even with the massive evidence that I've presented showing that cancer cannot be a genetic disease, they still hunt for genes. And they call it now gap of knowledge or dark matter. They come up with these crazy terminologies rather than say, God, maybe we were wrong. They were wrong because the theory under which they were looking for the management and the cures is not correct. It's not a genetic disease. It's a metabolic disorder. So the therapies that will work and drop the death rate were never entertained. And they threw Warburg under the bus because basically he was kind of an eccentric guy who pissed a lot of people off during the war. Sam Apple wrote a beautiful book on the Ravenous, all about Warburg's life. I even have a great book here that's very hard to get a hold of, written by Hans Krebs on Warburg, which is a little bit, some overlaps a lot with what Apple's book is, but there's a few other tidbits of knowledge in here. But the guy was he was a phenomenal kind of a guy, but very rigorous and steadfast in what he thought. And he got himself into his own hot water, I think. And we're going to clean that up. We're going to show how he was absolutely correct on the origin and how he misinterpreted the readouts of what these cancer cells were doing. He didn't know anything about amino acid fermentation.
Now, one of the things that you've mentioned a couple of times is lifestyle. And you're talking of lack of exercise, stress, ultra-processed foods. Now, the impact of that on one's body is too much glucose and too much crap that they're absorbing.
Yeah, I think you have to go back and look at our evolutionary past. I mean, we just didn't appear on the planet 100 years ago. As a species, we were here probably around, I don't know, saying 2 million, 2.5 million, somewhere in that area. So, you know, some people say, well, no, it was 600,000. Well, you know what I'm talking about, for Christ's sake. We've been around for a longer period of time than a lot of people. Definitely not 6,000 years ago, I'll tell you that much. You know, there's always, but then you got those people, the flat earth people that can't understand some of this stuff. But that's okay. We need all kinds. But the issue here, we're functioning as hunter-gatherers for several 100,000 years. What does that mean, hunter-gatherer? I had to kill something, and I had to gather something up. This requires a lot of walking. It requires a lot of energy to run after and kill a deer or an elephant or a bear or whatever the hell you're going to try to kill and eat. And you had to store as much energy in your body as possible to survive, to produce offspring for the next generation. Well, when you're eating deer and some plants and shit, when you can find them, you're not going to get fat eating that kind of stuff, with considering the amount of energy to use, all natural, no processed foods, and as I said, very little high carbohydrates. How are you going to get fat? So our bodies are uniquely designed to store energy. Then within a very short period of time, within 50 or 75 years, we have an obesity epidemic worldwide. What the hell happened there? In a couple of generations, I think obesity is more prevalent than starvation on the planet. So where did all this obesity come from? It came from several 100,000 years of our existence as hunter-gatherers. So I always tell people, if you don't know about evolutionary biology, look at the obesity epidemic. The obesity epidemic is evolution in action. What it is, for the first time on our existence on our planet, we have a massive amount of poorly processed carbs, which are insulin goes up, and the carbs are then stored as adipose, as triglycerides in adipose tissue. Not a mystery here. No mystery here. Now, when you have that much obesity and all the other things that go in with it, you get systemic inflammation. Systemic inflammation damages oxidative phosphorylation in cells. So that's why obesity has now replaced smoking as one of the top risk factors for cancer. This is not a mystery. Everything is based on evolutionary biology. So, and yet people don't seem to know that.
But then you have that denial that many people, and again, obesity, type 2 diabetes. But type 2 diabetes does not sell newspapers. In fact, many people still put their head in the sand and say, oh, my doctor has prescribed medication for me and I don't have to change my lifestyle.
Yeah, well, that's the human way too. Would you rather go back to live like you did in the Paleolithic period, or would you rather pop this pill? You know, everyone is out, pop the pill. I mean, so, okay, do it at your own risk. Don't bitch and moan about it. The problem is the healthcare, whether it's in the UK or the United States or in any other Western countries, are spending massive amounts of resources taking care of chronic diseases that are all produced in one way or another from diet and lifestyle. So, but everybody's getting rich on the backs of these, and people don't want to go back and say, oh man, and this Ozempic come, oh, everybody's looking fit and trim now. Who knows what that's going to do? You take that for 20 years and see what happens, and I don't know what's going to happen. We'll just have to see how it all pans out. But people are doing that rather than say, oh, I got to get up and run. The problem is our ancestors had no choice. Choices were not there. They couldn't say, shit, I'm not going to go after this deer today. Let me go down and get a big donut from the shop. There was no donuts. There was no shop. They had to go after the deer or the elephant. They had no choice. Our technology has accelerated at such a high rate. The progression, the evolution of our technology has massively outpaced the evolution of our body. Our bodies are still in the Paleolithic period, but our technology is now in a completely different arena. And we're paying the price for this with respect to cancer, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, dementia. All of those chronic diseases are in one way or another the result of our diet and lifestyle and the technology that makes all of the food so tasty and so convenient, right? I mean, no one is deprived of getting a sweet roll. Not to say that that's bad. I'm not telling anyone that we should close down McDonald's and Burger King and Taco Bell or any of these kinds of fast food places. They're enjoyable. They taste good. But if you're relying on that in a daily way and you're not exercising, you start getting obese, and then you put your body at risk for cancer, dementia, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, all the different chronic diseases. So, but I don't know if people know that. I mean, when you see these little kids that are 10 or 12 years old that are obese, is that parental neglect? Is it what the hell do you call that? Don't they folks know that you're putting that little kid at a disadvantage for living a normal lifespan on the planet? I mean, that's what we know. So
it's funny you say that about little kids. I remember when my daughters were at primary school and they would have fruit breaks in the morning, but in Australia, it's this breakfast cereal in the morning, fruit break, white sandwich bread for lunch. And then you wonder why the little kids from the age of, primary school age are little hoarders in the afternoon.
Yeah. Well, I don't know, Australia, they eat that Vegemite down there. You ever try that stuff?
Yes, I did actually, and it's absolutely disgusting. I spent 23 years living in Australia, and I can tell you, for a country, and it's quite bizarre, Thomas, it's the second highest obesity rate in the world.
I can't believe they could get fat eating Vegemite. I mean, if anything, you'd lose weight on it.
Thomas, it's all the other crap that you mentioned there about, the fast food outlets. There are more McDonald's in Sydney per capita per person than any other Western city in the world.
Oh, yeah. Well, we've seen it here in the Canadian population, the Inuits or the Eskimos, whatever you want to call them. Within 2 generations, they went from very fit to morbidly obese, chronic disease riddled. In Canada, I visited their medical school at Thunder Bay, where they service the Inuit Eskimo types. And boy, they have their health is so poor. And they used to be some of the fittest people on the planet, chasing down seals and whales and all the walruses and the stuff that they had to eat in that environment with very little fresh fruits and vegetables. But they were very, very fit, lean, and physically active people. And now we can see that all around the world. We have it with our own Native American populations in the United States. Their health, because they're eating fast foods that are poorly nutritious, and they're not exercising, and they're not doing the things they did as a group of people for thousands and thousands of years. And even Albert Schweitzer, the humanitarian physician, found no cancer in 15,000 people that he looked at in the African tribes living according to traditional ways. That was remarkable to him. He said, we couldn't find anybody with cancer. Well, what the hell is going on? Why are these people, then you go to England or some of the Western countries, you see cancer much more prevalent because we're no longer living according to traditional ancestral ways. We're relying more and more on technology and processed foods, and that's putting us at risk for a variety of ailments, not just cancer.
But there's a correlation. You mentioned it there. Type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular, dementia, cancer, they all present almost 80% of them very similarly.
Yeah, well, they're usually
inflammation, poor lifestyle.
Yeah, I mean, and it's all related to mitochondrial function. As I said, it's very, very difficult to get cancer if your mitochondria remain healthy. Because if the disorder is a mitochondrial metabolic disease, then, and that doesn't mean that type 2 diabetes can damage mitochondria in another way. Mitochondrial damage or inefficiency can present itself in many different ways, not just by cancer. Cancer can only happen in cells that have a capacity to increase fermentation when oxidative phosphorylation becomes inefficient. So that's why we rarely, if ever, see cancer in cardiac myocytes, the muscle cells that beat the heart, because they cannot transition to fermentation. They would die. Same thing with neurons in the brain. We rarely, if ever, find cancer coming out of our neurons. It's the glial cells that have the capacity to upregulate and sustain fermentation. So as Warburg said, you can't get cancer if the cell cannot replace oxidative phosphorylation with fermentation. So we clearly see it. Cells that cannot do that rarely, if ever, form tumors, whereas cells that can replace OXPHOS invariably are the ones that you see: breast, colon, lung, melanomas. All these guys are the kinds of cells that can replace OXPHOS with fermentation. And then what do they ferment? They ferment glucose and glutamine. They can't but metabolize fatty acids and ketone bodies. We know that. And I have all these people tell me, oh, that's not true. Prostate cancer cells can use ketone or fatty acids. And no, they can't, for Christ's sake. I did the damn studies myself. I published the stuff, for crying out loud. I hate it when these assholes tell me that they know what they're talking about when they've never done the research like we have. Pardon my French.
That's the beauty of this podcast. It's no BS, no bullshit. I want to take you to something that you mentioned. The power also, the hunter-gatherer aspect of our ancestors. Also, not only what we ate, but we also had a fasting time.
Well, that's most of our life was a fasting time. That's why we built religions around the feast. The feast was the time we could just eat and drink as much as we possibly could in that environment to celebrate the rarity of having a situation like that, because most of our existence was fasting. We were always in a state of ketosis, which was a state where blood sugar is low and ketones are elevated. Because my good friend Dominic D'Agostino,
for those who don't realize, he's a tank.
Yeah, he's always in a state of ketosis. Dom is an interesting guy. He eats a lot of meat. He eats vegetables, and he eats like 20 eggs a day or something. I always kid him about it. But he always measures his blood sugar and ketones using the glucose ketone index calculator. And, the bottom line is that he's living like a guy from the Paleolithic period. So he's very fit and he's strong. He's big muscle builder and all this kind of stuff. And but he's always in a state. He doesn't touch donuts or any of this kind of stuff. So he's living like Paleolithic man. But a lot of us in the societies don't want to live like Dominic. But that's the way. That was our state for hundreds of thousands of years. We were always in a state of ketosis. And even when we had the feast, what are we eating? We're eating a large amount of meat and whatever else they could find. It wasn't, boxes of jelly donuts. That was, we weren't eating that, or big pizzas, or any of the things that we've come to know. And even during the Neolithic period, when we started to cultivate grains and develop for the first time civilizations, if you want to call it that. But, growing crops required a lot of energy to harvest the crops. And the crops at first were quite nutritious. And it gave us, we didn't have to hunt down and track animals and live on a hunter-gatherer kind of a style. If the food was, we could grow the food and we can build society around the food. The problem today is that we've engineered so much of these foods to be all kinds of things in there that are not quite natural. And that, together with the abundance of energy, consumed, it leads to systemic inflammation and a constellation of chronic diseases. So I think it's good that people just be aware of this. If you exercise every day in a part of your routine, try to restrict, not eliminate, but just be aware of it, I think, and then go for the best. And some people, as I said, it's hard to get cancer. You really have to beat the crap out of your body to damage mitochondria. And germline mutations like BRCA1 and Li-Fraumeni P53 mutations, they all damage the oxidative phosphorylation in one way or another. So we went through all the so-called germline mutations that people say, oh, it has to be genetic. You see, again, it's in our family. It's true. But those mutations also directly impact negatively on the function of the mitochondria. And then people say, oh, no, my grandfather had cancer, my mother, and you guys are all eating the same crap from one generation to the next. So you're living in the same kind of a toxic environment that puts you at risk. And then on top of that, you may have a risk factor in the genome. But when you put it all together, you can't get cancer if your mitochondria remain healthy. So how do I keep my mitochondria healthy? Well, that's the thing that most people don't want to do.
And I was going to ask you there, you've mentioned it a few times, the importance of animal products, animal meat. For those who do not consume animal meat products, does that have an impact on their mitochondria?
Well, it's hard for me to say about that. I mean, we certainly did not evolve. If there were those people, our ancestors did not evolve as vegetarians and vegans. Those guys, if we did that, you and I would not have this. We would be extinct, right? We couldn't. We were a species that ate and could eat and kill anything that walked or crawled on this planet. And there are groups of members of our species today that are still doing things like that in some part of the world. But yeah, it was culture and religion and things like that that took our brains away from traditional ways of doing things. So yeah, when you think about how we evolved as a species, man, we were tough dudes to survive the ice ages and still survive in these incredibly hostile environments. And no, I mean, there was no, I imagine some cave guy saying, no, I'm sorry, I can only eat the leaves on this plant. How long is he going to live? How many offspring is he going to produce?
The other bit around lifestyle, which I know a lot of people sometimes forget, is the importance of sleep.
Yeah. Well, that's so important as well. I have on my wall up here, when I gave a talk in Korea, there was a couple of Japanese guys there, and they were calling it the cancer lifestyle. And it says, number one, no exercise. Number two, you're mostly miserable, no happiness, poor food, stress, and poor sleep. You put all those things together, and you're just you're walking into dysregulated cell growth somewhere in your body. And that's a very important thing. Emotional stress, poor sleep, being miserable all the time, depressed, all of these things. And sometimes that depression comes from the diet and lifestyle itself. There's an effect on your brain and emotional state of health by eating crap food all the time. So, obesity can often be associated with mental anguish and things like this. So yeah, it's no one thing. It's a constellation of things. Cancer is related to diet and lifestyle issues. There's no question about it. Genes are risk factors, but they work together with an environment. So, and once you get tumors, like we can talk all day about how to prevent cancer, and everybody would prefer to pop a pill than get their ass on a chair and walk around 3 miles. So you have to say, okay, but people, now I have cancer, stage 4 cancer. What are you going to do for me? Okay, I should have I should have done more sleep. I should have eaten the right food. I shouldn't have been so stressed out. All that's in the past. Now I have stage 4 colon cancer. I have breast cancer. I have lung cancer. What are you going to do for me? Okay, so we know the tumor is fermenting. We know that it's growing out of control. So the key is try to take away the two fermentable fuels driving the dysregulated cell growth. And that's glucose and glutamine. And we interrogated all the amino acids and sugars that will drive the tumor, and we can't find anything except these two. So, and they can't burn fatty acids or ketone bodies. So how to manage cancer is getting into nutritional ketosis and then using drugs that target the glutamine problem, because you need drugs to target the glutamine problem. And that's where we developed the press pulse therapeutic strategy for managing cancer, where we can press glucose down good because it's a non-essential metabolite. And we transition the body over to ketones. And then we strategically go after the glutamine pathway, the glutaminolysis pathway. And one of the best drugs is 6-deoxynorlucine, which is DON, and we can't get it. I mean, I can get it from my research, and if I had cancer, I know where to get it, but it's not available in the medical oncology centers. You can't get it. One of the best drugs available for targeting the glutamine metabolism of a tumor, and nobody has access to it. Well, you know, and they say, oh, it was too toxic. Well, man, you didn't use it in the right way. Everything can be toxic if you don't know how to use it. So you have to know how to use the tools that are available to you. If you don't know how to use the tools, then you're not going to get the optimum outcome from the utilization of this. All we're saying is you better reevaluate the whole concept of how cancer is managed, because it is absolutely a manageable disease if people and the professionals come to know that it's a mitochondrial metabolic disorder. Then the strategies for managing the disease become much more logical and will be more effective.
And have you managed to do any research, I'm not familiar if you have or you haven't, around the impact of things like EMFs, mobile phones, light, etc., as an impact to damaging the mitochondria?
Yeah, very important point. I know we have, when I was at a UK childhood cancer meeting, one of the investigators from London, I believe, was looking at a cell phone impact on the brain. And you could see it, it's age dependent. Little kids, the EMF waves penetrate deep into the brain. And, you know, here's the funny thing. Yeah, obviously, as you get older and your skull gets thicker, your brain cells are more protected. But what these guys did is they went out and they said, well, we studied this over and over again. We don't see EMF producing mutations in DNA. And I'm saying, what the hell? Who gives a shit about the mutations, man? What does EMF do to mitochondrial function? So it turns out the EMF heats the brain. It causes elevated temperature rise from the waves. And elevated temperature can compromise the function of oxidative phosphorylation chronically. So what you're doing is you're creating, EMF waves can interfere with mitochondrial function. And mitochondrial function is the origin of cancer. Dysregulated cell growth comes from anything a chronic disruption of oxidative phosphorylation leads to compensatory fermentation and downstream mutations. So the EMF itself is not considered a carcinogen, but what it can do is it can change the microenvironment, damaging oxidative phosphorylation, thereby leading to upregulation of fermentation and dysregulated cell growth. Once it's what I'm saying of someday will be so understood by almost everybody. It's no different than the discussions people had about the heliocentric and the geocentric organization of the solar system. I mean, if you talk to anybody today, they'll all say, oh, yeah, the sun is the center of the solar system. The planets revolve around the sun. Everybody knows that. Well, there was a time in our history when you would have been executed, like Bruno, for saying something like that. Of course, they would say the Earth has to be the center of the solar system. Now it's obvious that the sun is the center of the solar system. That was the Copernican revolution. And at some point, they're going to realize, oh, you got cancer. What did you do to your mitochondria? What did you do to your mitochondria to get cancer? But right now, that's unknown. They're still chasing genes. They still think, oh, no, this mutation is responsible. No, it's not. Those are all downstream effects. It's damage to the oxidative phosphorylation with compensatory fermentation. That's the origin of the disorder. And we can manage it once you know that. But go and ask your colleagues at the top medical schools in the oncology. They never heard of what I'm talking about. They never heard of Otto Warburg. They never heard that sugar drives the dysregulated growth. Many of them, not all of them.
Look, I mentioned to you that I had stage 4 cancer, and my hematologist in Australia, I would go and see him, and he would say to me, Martin, I don't know what you're doing, but you look great. and you should have relapsed at least twice now. But stop eating as much red meat. But your bloods are fantastic. And you go, what the hell are you talking about? So we had this arrangement, Thomas. I said, when you start teaching me about blood disorders, I'll start teaching you about proper nutrition.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's the whole thing. I think if you can try to avoid the things that will damage your oxidative phosphorylation if you're aware of them, and then if that didn't work and you do happen to get a tumor of one sort or another, the first thing you do is you launch into a strict a nutritional metabolic approach, and then you gradually use the parasite medications that will target and kill tumor cells also. And that's only because the parasites and the tumors use a common pathway to generate energy. They use the mitochondrial substrate level phosphorylation pathway, which we have identified as being a major source of energy in cancer cells. That's how I got onto it, because I said, oh, yeah, damn, these parasites in the cancer cells, they seem to survive using similar energy pathways. Well, it tells you the drugs right there that you should use. You don't have to go out and discover something new. It's already there. You just guys didn't know how to use it. So you got to use it. You got to use it the right way. And you say, well, I have people that are always being treated for worms and they still get cancer. Yeah, because they probably are eating crap food. You got to put it all together in a package, so all parts of the therapy are working together simultaneously to get the optimal outcome for management. So yeah, so all this is going to take place. It's just a matter of time. And guys like you are distributing the information. What I'm doing is simply pounding out the science. There's a lot of people out there, they can talk about this, that looks like they know what they're talking about. We're doing the damn research and publishing it. And I'm looking at this, and I'm writing these papers, and I'm evaluating the scientific literature in a very deep way and putting the parts of the puzzle together. And that eventually will be seen by everybody else, just like we know the sun is the center of the solar system, not the Earth.
And you've got a great depository of all this information, because it's quite easy to find your stuff publicly that you put out there.
What I find it remarkable that some of our papers have hundreds, over 100,000, sometimes 200,000 views. So people are reading it. The problem is you don't see it cited in the scientific. Oh, it is cited for sure.
Oh, what a shame.
Yeah. Oh, and that's because the scientific field is locked into confirmation bias. It's a preconceived notion of what something has to be. I'm reading what you're saying. I don't believe it because I can't believe it. I'm going to lose my NIH grant. I'm not going to make money on this pharmaceutical drug. But they'll read it, but they won't cite it. God forbid they cite this stuff. But people are reading it. Believe me, they know what the hell is going on. And when they get cancer, they come to me and say, give me some information on how to manage my cancer with metabolic therapy. Many physicians.
It's remarkable, and I know that you've got a great team around you as well. So kudos to the team that you've managed to pull together. And Dom's obviously one of them as well, that's doing a terrific agency around this is how you should be living, cutting out the crap food, cutting out the sodas, the fizzy drinks, but also be kind to yourself. There will be times when, you know what, have a glass of wine. That's okay. Don't try and be Snow White all the time.
Yeah. No, you're right. But right now we're seeing an epidemic of cancer, and in the United States, it's killing 1,700 people per day, and when you look at it, that's about 70 people per hour are dying from cancer in the United States. I don't know what it is in Scotland or the UK. But it's only because the population is smaller. Yet a lot of these folks are dying in a horrific way too. It's not a quick death; it's a slow, brutal kind of a death. And about 50% of the folks are dying from the treatments. They're dying from the poisons and the treatments they're being given to manage their disease. Your body just gets beat down, and the normal cells, no mas, they give up. Your whole body shuts down as the result of the poisoning and surgical mutilations and all the crazy stuff we're giving to these people based on an incorrect theory. So when you treat cancer as a metabolic disease, you're not only going to slowly degrade the tumor, but you're going to enhance the health and vitality of the normal cells in your body at the same time. So you would emerge from treatment of cancer in a healthier state than you were when you started it. Not looking like some guy just getting out of a concentration camp, skin and bones and all this kind of stuff. This is terrible stuff. What did you do to that poor person? It's nuts. So, but people have to come, and they run to these top medical schools thinking they're going to get the best knowledge. And the problem is most of these guys never heard of this. And it's not even their fault as much as it is the system didn't train them to know the power of nutrition, the power of using food as medicine, the power to recognize that cancer cannot be a genetic disease. Get over it. Then if it's not a genetic disease, what is it? It's a mitochondrial metabolic disease driven by a fermentation metabolism. So, well, that's not so difficult. We can manage that kind of a disease. You're damn right you can. But nobody can do it because the system is you're locked into a certain belief system. And that belief system has to be removed. And that's called dogmatic ideology.
It's called Hypnotism 101.
Yeah, I know. It's just unbelievable. But hey, listen, people, as I said, people want to live. They're going to find a way to survive. And they're going to put pressure on this. And when you mentioned about Nixon's war on cancer in 1971, Americans love to call a war on something the war on poverty, the war on cancer. Let's count the dead bodies and let's go after it. So when the progress was not sufficient enough, the federal government at the National Cancer Institute said, we can accelerate this whole race to the cure by inviting the pharmaceutical companies into the labs to help us out.
Oh.
How's that working out for us? How's that working out for us?
A couple of years ago, I was invited to a research lab in Sydney, and they were doing research on mice. And I asked the question, are you monitoring what you're feeding them, the light, the sleep? And they said, why are we caring about that? We want to look at this tumor. And I'm going, I'm out.
Well, and not only that, they use these genetically engineered mice that don't exist in the real world. They use genetically engineered tumors in a genetically engineered mouse.
So let me ask you, Thomas, if you had a crystal ball with all the work that you're doing, if you had a crystal ball, what would health education look like and feel like for the next generation?
Well, I think we have some people that are reaching the point where something has to be done about the re-education of the medical community when it comes to chronic diseases, cancer included. I think physicians are going to have to get certified to be recognized as knowledgeable in managing chronic diseases using metabolic therapies. So, and that, not to say that we get rid of pharmacy, but the pharmacy could be used more effectively when the body is in a state capable of benefiting maximally from the pharmacy. So, so I think we just need to reevaluate what we're doing and how we're doing it, and be certified to know. So you don't have these charlatans coming in telling people, "Oh, I got a drug that's going to be great for glutamine," and that was never tested. There's no evidence to support what they're saying, because you always get the charlatans, the quacks, the nutcases moving into space that should be there by professionals, and therefore we have to be always cautious about that. That's why I think a certification re-education mission becomes essential for people getting these medical degrees for managing cancer and other chronic diseases. They should know most of these are metabolic problems, and they should use metabolic therapies to manage these kinds of conditions.
I think that opens a massive gap, an opportunity for people like myself who are health coaching, that have the knowledge but can work with the medical practitioner and work with a team of people to help.
Yeah, well, that's why we developed the glucose ketone index calculator, which you can do with Keto Mojo or any of these meters. And the technology field is developing these like Free Libre, where you can get real-time management of your blood sugar and ketones, and then it feeds to your cell phone, and you can actually know as you're there what zone you're in.
Yeah.
And you can test it. Let me see what happens when I eat this jelly-filled donut.
Listen, I can't believe that you've just ostracized the majority of Australians slagging them off about the Vegemite when you have jelly sandwiches. Is it jelly and crap that you have? So I mean, come on, let's get real here, Thomas. Thomas, I know that we're kind of time poor at the moment, so I'm going to wind it up there. And on behalf of everybody here, and when we put this out to air, I cannot thank you enough for the wisdom, the intelligence, a little bit of wit, and a little bit of humor as well. But from the heart of Glasgow to the heart of Boston where you are, sir, thank you so much for the precious gift of your time today.
Well, thank you very much, Martin. It was a pleasure to be here.